This video is designed to help you understand the means available to you as you research and write your argument. In other words, how to induce cooperation. I'm going to begin with a quote by Erika Lindemann that talks about the purpose in writing. Rhetoric implies choices for both the speaker or writer and the audience. When we practice rhetoric, we make decisions about our subject, audience, point of view, purpose, and message. We select our best evidence, the best order in which to present our ideas, and the best resources of language to express them. Our choices aim to create an effect in our audience. However, the notion of choice carries with it an important ethical responsibility. Our strategies must be reasonable and honest. Furthermore, the audience must have a choice in responding to the message, must be able to adopt, modify, or reject it. A burglar who holds a gun to my head and calmly expresses an intention to rob me may induce cooperation, but not by means of rhetoric. Similarly, a formal argument that urges human beings not to age is not rhetorical. But when we use language in more formal ways with the intention of changing attitudes or behaviors, of explaining a subject matter, of expressing the self, or of calling attention to a text that can be appreciated for its artistic merits, our purpose is rhetorical. And this is our goal with this paper, is to help you understand how to use that language in order to change attitudes or behaviors in your audience. So when writing an argument, one must first consider the following things: your subject, audience, and purpose. When considering your subject, it's important to think about what you're writing about and why it's important. So my example down here, I've chosen the topic genocide and human rights violations. And the reason I chose it was because I believe as humans we should not condone violent behavior toward our fellow human beings. Then I want to think about my audience. What audience is best served by this subject or targeted with this subject? And I chose the United Nations because they deal with human rights violations and genocide across the globe. But I want to understand my audience. So in thinking about who your audience is, you want to think about these questions. What do I know about them? How can this knowledge then help me use a structure and specific language to best induce cooperation in them? So I would need to visit the United Nations website to discover a little bit more about them. Then you want to think about the purpose. What is your goal in writing this argument? So thinking about why you want to write about it, why it's important to your audience, what are the most important elements of the topic that suit the audience, and what response do you actually want from them? So in thinking about my purpose, I said my goal is to get the United Nations to take action and send humanitarian aid to regions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where certain ethnic groups are being murdered because of their ethnicity. In order to do this, I will need to provide a well-crafted researched brief about the issues in the region and a letter calling them to action. Now, there are three major appeals one can use when writing an argument. The first one is ethos, and this is the writer establishing his or her credibility to speak or write on the topic. And there are 5 different ways to establish your credibility as a writer. 1, be sure to use credible and reliable sources to obtain your information. And then also you want to make sure you have enough information to support that argument. So an example of this would be if you're studying or researching an issue of a medical nature, cancer, stem cells, be sure to use journals and sources that have established reputations in that profession. The second thing you want to do is address the opposing viewpoints. And in doing so, you want to make sure you represent them accurately and fairly. That way you're demonstrating that I can represent the other argument. And you want to make sure that you're not trying to skew them, because this can turn away your audience and then they're not going to get your message, and you won't be fulfilling your purpose in writing the argument. So for example, if you're urging funding for a type of medical research that is controversial, stem cell research, be sure to address why the other point of view disagrees with this type of research. And again, doing it without using biased language. The third thing you want to do is establish common ground with your audience by acknowledging their beliefs and values. So if you're writing a paper on abortion, you want to acknowledge where you actually agree with all of the readers, all of the audience members. So you might write something such as humans, we believe that every life has value. The question remains, when does that life begin? So you are agreeing that we all have common ground in that we believe every life has value. The fourth thing you can do is organize the text in an easy-to-follow logical manner for the subject matter. So thinking about your audience and what structure would best induce cooperation in them. For my audience, the United Nations, after I've conducted some research, I would realize that in order to get my message across, they want a researched brief in a particular structure or format. In order to do that, I want to make sure that my argument fits into that structure and format. The fifth thing you can do is be sure to proofread your argument. Those grammar and spelling mistakes that are obvious are strikes against your credibility. And then you also want to make sure you're not using language or a tone that's going to turn your audience away. So something that's going to engage them and make them want to continue reading your argument. The second type of appeal is pathos. And this is appealing to the character or mental state of the audience, so trying to tap into their emotions, values, and needs. And the way to do this is by using individual stories or interviews that helps make the subject matter real to the audience, so they can kind of see, hear, taste, and feel it. But one caution with this is not overusing it, just filling your entire paper or argument with stories to depict the situations, because this actually ends up detracting from the argument and your message gets lost in there because all people can see are these stories. So I have an example here with this picture of a child, and the message is stopping the abuse, but the writer has chosen to, or the photographer has chosen to depict the child with their hand out, so you can see that small hand, and then using the term pretty please is language that younger children would use, and so they're appealing to those values of the audience to try to stop abuse. The third type of appeal is logos, and this is the appeal to logic and reason, and there are two major types of reasoning. The first is inductive reasoning, where it takes a representative case or facts and draws reliable conclusions or generalizations from them. And you want to make sure it's based on sufficient data and evidence. So like my example here is the term genocide was first used after the Jewish Holocaust. It was from this particular genocide that historians and scholars began to develop the 8 stages of genocide. So I took a representative case, the Jewish Holocaust, and out of that developed some general principles of genocide, and that was based on sufficient data and evidence from that atrocity. The second type is deductive reasoning, and it begins with a generalization and applies it to a specific case, so it's the opposite of inductive reasoning. Again, the generalization needs to be based on sufficient and reliable data and evidence. So example here, we have the human rights violations occurring in the Democratic Republic of Congo demonstrate the first 4 of the 8 stages of genocide. Thus, the UN should classify the atrocities currently being perpetrated in this country as genocide. So here I've taken the general principles of genocide, those 8 stages, and I've applied them to a specific case that I see happening in order to make my argument. Now, in using logos, you want to make sure that you avoid what we call logical fallacies. And I'm not going to go over all of them because there are quite a few, but if you visit Purdue OWL, the online writing lab website, you will find an excellent resource detailing these logical fallacies and how to avoid them. So if your teacher happens to mention that you've used one in your paper, this is a way during revision to go back and correct that and figure out how best to avoid using it. So remember that as you conduct your research and write your argument, you need to pay special attention to audience and purpose. Your aim is to make sure that all elements of your message induce cooperation in your audience.